So here's where we are. We're at session 4. At session 3, we ended with persecution and heresies, and remember the last thing we talked about was Constantine and how he helped Christianity by ending the persecutions, and we are making about a 1,000-year leap into the Reformations now. And even though there's an incredible amount of really interesting stuff that we could easily go over during this period as far as the development of the Roman Catholic Church, the split between the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church, all the different popes and all the fun murders and stuff that took place to get this pope in, and all the infighting that went on. It's not really very germane to how we got to where we are here in United Methodism, and it can get really detailed. So I decided, well, let's just skip forward into the Reformations. And when you think about Reformation, what do you think about?
Reform. Paybacks. Paybacks.
Mm-hmm.
A new consciousness.
But everybody says, oh, the Reformation, that's Martin Luther. He came in and nailed his 95 thesis on the door of the college, and that was it. Well, there's a whole lot more that went on besides that, and that's why this is called Reformations, because we're going to cover not only the Protestant Reformation from Luther, but we also had Zwingli and John Calvin in Sweden, and then we're going to end up today talking about the English Reformation. It's also called the Anglican Reformation, and how the Anglican Church got formed. And we're going to come right up to the point of, okay, this is where the Anglican Church in England is, and now here comes John Wesley. So this is all going to dovetail into session 5, which is going to be our Wesleyan heritage, which will be next week. But first we want to talk about, just in general, what Reformation is all about. So we will start there.
The Protestant Reformation is widely known for Martin Luther's publication of his 95 Theses, or Disputation of the Power and Efficacy of Indulgences, and marks a second schism of sorts for the Catholic Church. In reality, the Reformation of Western Christianity was long in the making, and Martin Luther was not its only leader. While many view the start of the Protestant Reformation as having been in 1517 following the publication of Martin Luther's Theses, the actual date of its beginning is somewhat unclear. There were essentially 3 main Reformation movements, one in Germany, one in England, and one in Switzerland, with all of them occurring around the same time in the 16th century. The German Reformation, led by Martin Luther, is generally the movement that most people think of when the topic is discussed. Martin Luther, prior to the Reformation, was actually a professor of theology and a priest. During his time as such, Luther was sent to represent the observant German Augustinian monasteries in Rome between the fall of 1510 and spring of 1511. Where he came to notice a lack of spirituality throughout Rome that left a lasting negative impression on him. This pessimistic view of the church only worsened after Luther discovered a Dominican friar, Johann Tetzel, who preached that sins could be forgiven by the purchase of a letter of indulgence approved by the Pope, allowing for one's soul to skip time in purgatory before entering heaven. The money from these indulgences was being put toward the rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome, which Luther bravely claimed should be paid for by the wealthy Pope himself. In response to this indulgence controversy,
Okay, I almost thought there's one thing they left out that I thought was pretty interesting. This Tessel guy that we're trying to get people to buy indulgences and buying your way into heaven. he used to go around and preach at all these different places and to raise money for this, and his motto was that you not only could buy your own way into heaven, but if some of your relatives are dead, you could buy their way into
Oh my
heaven
gosh.
by buying these indulgences. If they are in purgatory, and if you buy an indulgence on their behalf, then they automatically go to heaven. And so his motto was, as soon as the coin in the coffer rings, the soul from purgatory springs.
In whose pocket did the money go?
The money went to remodel St. Peter's Basilica.
I see.
That's where all the money went to.
Okay, say that thing again, when the, what falls at the coin?
When the coin in the coffer rings,
Oh,
coffer meaning
yeah,
the soul from purgatory springs.
And I'm imagining this was only viable for the wealthy.
No, you just
Well,
have
whoever
to
had the
have
money,
Yeah,
whoever had the money, I'm not sure how much the indulgence is.
Well, yeah, but poor people don't have a lot of money.
but they would give everything they had. Yeah, this was right exactly when I turned my back on Catholicism. That was the point.
Okay, I forgot they didn't say anything about that. I always thought that was the most interesting part of it.
Luther wrote his 95 Theses, which was supposed to inspire a debate about the issuance of indulgences, with the assumption that his concerns would be heard and understood. Copies of the propositions were sent out to a few friends, and to Archbishop Albert of Mainz, who was Tetzel's superior, accompanied by a request for the friar's preachings to be stopped. Luther's grievances were not met with the reaction he anticipated, and his disapproval of the church began to expand into growing theological disagreements. By 1518, Luther had come to believe that the view of the church, which stated that salvation came from both the grace of God, in addition to good works and human actions to earn reconciliation, was utterly false, and that humans were unable to earn salvation. It was simply an act of God's forgiving grace. Furthermore, Luther came to the conclusion that the Bible itself should be viewed as the only reliable source of information and authority, as opposed to the teachings of the Church and the Pope having that role. Since the printing press had recently been discovered, this gave Luther a vast advantage, as new translations of the Bible could now be printed and provided to anyone with the ability to read, so that they could learn from the Bible themselves instead of relying on priests and other clergy members. In Switzerland, a Reformation paralleling Luther's began around 1522 under the guidance of Huldrych Zwingli, William Farel, and later John Calvin. Zwingli, a priest, taught similar ideas to what Martin Luther was preaching in Germany, but on an even more radical level. Beginning in Zurich, Zwingli's movement quickly took a stronghold in the city, and by 1526, Farel, a fellow reformer, began to assist him in spreading the message to the French-speaking parts of Switzerland, giving sermons in different cities, including Geneva. In 1536, Farel met John Calvin, who authored the Institutes of the Christian Religion Doctrine, and would help Farel to organize the Reformed Church of Geneva. Additionally, Martin Luther was not the only reformer to translate the Bible into vernacular for the masses to read themselves, as the Swiss did the same. The Reformation also spread rapidly in Switzerland, and Calvin's work reached as far as Scotland to the west and Transylvania to the east. As both Calvinism and Lutheranism gained traction throughout Europe, England fell into its own Reformation. In the far west, King Henry VIII prompted the Third Simultaneous Reformation for both religious and political reasons. Mainly, the monarch was outraged by Pope Clement VII's denial of an annulment for Henry's marriage to Catherine of Aragon. In 1534, the English king declared that he should from then on be the only final authority on all matters within the English Church, thereby establishing the Anglican Church, and the start of a new Reformation movement. King Henry also insisted that the Bible be made available for the people, demanding that every parish obtain a copy, and additionally requiring that liturgy be prepared in English. Paralleling Henry's changes, Scotland also joined the Reforms, thanks to the inspiration John Knox received from John Calvin back in Switzerland. Knox now formed the Presbyterian branch of Protestantism. Eventually, though shamefully late, the Catholic Church formulated a systematic response to the growing Protestant Reformation, in the form of what is simply called the Counter-Reformation. Although some steps were taken to address the reformers earlier on, such as the excommunication of Martin Luther back in 1521, the Catholic Church as a whole failed to do much at the start. The first major move taken by the Church was under Pope Paul III, who called for the Council of Trent in 1545. The three-part series of councils held between 1545 through 1563 not only addressed the challenging of Catholic doctrine by the Protestants, but also established decrees of self-reform. In the first council, the bishops in attendance were divided as to whether full-out reform was needed or simply a clarification of Catholic doctrine. Many issues were discussed, such as the Creed of Nicaea and Constantinople, which was confirmed as the foundation of the Catholic faith, the number of sacraments, which should be 7, tradition, which was accepted as a source of faith, as well as other subjects that had been challenged by Martin Luther in particular, which subsequently led to the decision to formally deny the Reformers' idea that humans had no ability to earn salvation through behavior such as good works. Political discord put the progress of the council on hold until the next period of talks began in 1551. As the second part started, a growing number of Protestants, mainly from Germany, began to insist upon a re-evaluation of what had been decided upon by the council back in 1545. But nothing of the sort was done, and the council continued on. This time, one of the main subjects addressed was the sacrament of Eucharist, which the Catholic Church confirmed to include that the bread and wine were believed to truly transform into the body and blood of Christ, although not in appearance. This assertion was of course in direct contradiction to the Reformists, which came as no surprise. Further doctrine was solidified before the council was interrupted by political disputes yet again. When Pope Paul IV took over, the whole concept of the council came under serious doubt due to his direct opposition to the notion. Finally, in 1562, Pope Pius IV decided to reinstate the council, and the bishops regathered. During the last leg of the meetings, updated statements and decrees were made concerning Mass, holy orders, purgatory, matrimony, indulgences, saints, and again, more details concerning Eucharist. Reforms were also made for the morals of clerics, and much of the corruption and abuses that had inspired the Protestant Reformation, such as the clerical overspending and favoritism within appointments made to the church office, were soon resolved, allowing the Catholic Church to regain a large amount of its support throughout Europe. Still, it was too late to reverse the break within the Western Church, and Protestantism was on an upward path of growth at a fast pace. To combine the spreading Protestant theology, the Roman Inquisition put a heavy focus on the prosecution of anyone deemed a heretic, such as the Protestants themselves. While the Roman Inquisition was drastically milder than the previously established Spanish Inquisition, it was famously known for putting Galileo on trial in 1633. Furthermore, the effects of the Protestant Reformation's popularity triggered wars of religion all throughout Europe, with one of the first being fought in France between the Catholics and Protestants, and ending in the regaining of France for the Catholic Church, though also providing a level of tolerance for the Protestants in the area. The 30 Years' War broke out in 1618 as well, mainly in modern-day Germany and is said to have potentially wiped out 40 to 60% of their population. Other wars with Catholic versus Protestants undertones would include the Scottish Jacobite Rising, the Scamal-Caldic War, the Dutch Revolt, and many more. Even wars that were not solely based on religious conflict were fueled by the disconnect between Catholics and Protestants. Today, though, the relationship between the Western churches is remarkably better than it once was. There is still a sharply clear schism between the beliefs of Protestants and Catholics, and some disputes and even violence have only recently died down, or still remain today in small pockets of the world. The history and existence of the Protestant Reformation not only stands as a vastly significant event due to its contribution to the creation of today's Protestant Christian denominations, but it also shows the true uniqueness of the Catholic denomination, which had clearly survived the Great Schism only a few centuries prior. Now, around the world, we have thousands of smaller Christian branches or denominations, divided mostly into the Catholic, Orthodox, Protestant, Anglican, Assyrian, and Restoration denominations. Undoubtedly, the Protestant Reformation more than helped to shape modern Christianity.
Just a comment before you continue. Even today, the British monarch, king or queen, is designated as the topmost head of the Church of England. I find that
And
interesting.
must be Protestant.
Oh, yeah,
You can't be
absolutely.
Catholic.
But that's
Can
part
no
of the
longer be
coronation
Catholic.
process.
One of the other things that we skipped, we just conveniently kind of skipped over in all this, was the fall of the Roman Empire, which I think might be significant.
Yeah.
All this is going on. And the Great Schism, you heard him refer to the Great Schism, which was when the Roman Catholic Church and the Eastern Orthodox Church split. And then we also had Islam come in from the east and came in as far as Constantinople
Yeah.
and took over a good percentage of the Eastern Orthodox Church. And also then, they went down and took over Egypt and went across northern Africa and back up into Spain and started coming in on that side. So when you had Islam coming in from the east and the west, squeezing the Roman Empire and the Eastern Orthodox Church, that almost was the end of Christianity. I mean, they were just right there on the doors.
And in fact, when they took over Constantinople, that's when it became Istanbul. Or,
Mhm.
yeah.
Yeah, Istanbul. Mhm.
Another thing I noticed was at the end of his discussion, where he's talking about all these various Christian sects that exist today. When I was in Albania, I visited a Greek Orthodox church.
Mhm.
Greek Orthodox was kicked out of Greece, so they settled in Albania.
Mm.
And in this, at this church, they were devout followers of Peter and Paul, Christian, but those were the prophets. And the priest flat out said that you Protestants are all sinners.
Uh-huh.
I was offended.
Well, we just kind of get along with the Catholics now, but there's still some major doctrinal differences.
Well, they have their own Bible
Mhm.
with scripture that we don't have.
Mhm. The,
Well, it
I
just,
know,
it doesn't fit with Reformation values.
I have one session that I usually give to the kids during a confirmation class where I start here with all of the different, beginning with the Protestant Reformation and all the other sects, and I trace all of them around to this group became Presbyterians, this group became Episcopalians, and this one became this, and all the different types of denominations that there are, and I trace it. But it really, again, it's not germane to what we're talking about. We're just going to follow. Now we're going to diverge off because Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation, that's not our history. Our history goes through King Henry VIII and the English Reformation. So up till this point, we have been following along with general Christian history. And so this is the point that we're going to veer off away from general Christian history and begin with now the beginnings of the Anglican Church, which started a little bit in this video, but this next one we're going to look at is we're going to go back and go a lot deeper into the Anglican Church and where it came from. Anything else, everybody? Ready to move?
Well, it was Henry VIII that created the Anglican Church. Who was King James, for whom we have the earliest Bible in
He's
English?
a little down the road.
Okay,
In that,
but he
he's
wrote
an
the
English
scripture that becomes the basis.
or he had it written.
Oh, I see.
He had it written, and I've been trying my best to find a video. There was a video that they showed us in course of study, and the whole video was King James and the King James Bible, and why you should not use the King James Bible.
Oh.
And I thought it was fascinating, but I can't find it. I do know the professor that showed it, so I need to contact him because I know how to get a hold of him. I've been meaning to get a hold of him and have him tell me how to get to that video. But we're going to go backwards a little bit now and talk about the Anglican Reformation.
And now we're taking another 100-year stride through history. And this is Hampton Court, home to the most famous of all English kings. We're talking overweight, we're talking Tudor, we're talking 6 wives. Exactly, Henry VIII. And how does Henry fit into this story we're telling? This story of power and of how people were ruled in England? Well, I'll tell you. Do you remember the Becket story? Henry II takes on the power of the church and Becket ends up dead on the cathedral floor. Well, 400 years later, his namesake, Henry VIII, took on the power of the church again. And this time, he won. By 1528, Henry had been married to Catherine of Aragon for 20 years. But he fancied Anne Boleyn, her lady-in-waiting. To divorce Catherine, he needed the permission of the church, which was controlled, remember, by the Pope in Rome. And the Pope refused. What happened next was that Anne Boleyn gave Henry a book, and it was a banned book. It was illegal even to possess it. It was written by a man called William Tyndale. Tyndale criticized the Pope. He dreamt of a new kind of Christianity that would sweep away the power of the earthly church and simply get back to people worshipping God with no church in between. And this book planted a seed in Henry's mind because he realized if there was no Pope, he could get his divorce. And so just because Henry wanted to marry his mistress, the church in England split from the Church of Rome. This is Rievaulx in Yorkshire, one of numerous abbeys, monasteries, priories, closed down in what's now known as the Reformation. It was all perfectly legal. Henry went to Parliament and he was declared the supreme head of the English church, and he set to work destroying the church's earthly power. And most of the MPs went along with it because they, like Tyndale, mistrusted the power and wealth of the church. But also, the church had land. There was a killing to be made here, carving up the church's lands. The Reformation was the greatest land grab since the Norman conquest. And with all this new land, the power of the landed gentry in the 16th century rose yet further. But what made the Reformation so exciting was its impact on ordinary people. I've come to St Michael's in Copford Green in Essex, not just to admire these magnificent wall paintings, but to show you this. It's a rood screen, not R-U-D-E, rood, but R-O-O-D. And in churches before the Reformation, screens like this separated the people.
The rood screen is in the Episcopal Church.
Oh,
If you go to this Episcopal church over here, they have one of these rood screens.
oh, yeah.
People who sat down there from the altar. Only the priest could approach the altar, because remember, the church taught that only through the church, through the priests, could the people be with God. And the Reformation tore down these barriers between God and the people. And for the first time, people came to believe there was nothing separating them from God. God was with them. And this idea filled them with energy. It gave them hope. And another thing that happened with the Reformation, Bibles, for the first time, were printed in English. Before then, they'd all been in Latin. And when people came to read the Bible for themselves, what did they find? Wonderful stories of a man called Jesus, who came to give hope not to the rich, but the poor. And stories of bad kings punished by God. So yes, the Reformation made Henry more powerful. But he'd opened a can of worms.
So one of the things you will notice, if we're starting with the United Methodist Church and working your way backwards, if there were different ways you could go, the one that was the most controversial, the one that caused the most trouble, that's where we came from. You know, everything was fine, and Constantine then came up with all these bizarre ideas. Okay, well, that's where we want to be. And then you come down here to Henry VIII, who the only reason to start, or not the only reason, but to me, the main reason he wanted to start another church is he wanted to marry his mistress,
Yeah.
and the Pope wouldn't annul his marriage. And so for that reason, mainly, he just said, well, we're just not Catholic anymore. And he got his own priest to annul the marriage, and then he married the mistress.
It's a little deeper than that, because he also wanted assets of the Catholic
Yeah.
Church that were residing in England.
Well, I was just wondering, how could he take over the Catholic Church's assets? Because he was the king, he could just
Yeah.
say, okay, you're mine?
By right of domain.
Mhm.
I was thinking about that while I was watching the video.
He just says there is no Catholic Church in England anymore.
Gotcha.
Oh, look, a church. Well, this must be ours.
Oh, yeah, and the land, and everything else.
And one of the things, do you remember we talked about before where we thought the Arian controversy was a one-time deal, and whether or not Jesus was present at creation or not? And they had the Nicene, the Council of Nicaea came up with the Nicene Creed, where we determined that no, Jesus was of the same substance as God. And that worked really good until the next emperor came up and he decided he was Arian. And so the whole Roman Empire became Arian. And then the Goths and the Vikings and everything came down and they decided they were Arian, so it became Arian. And then we got a new emperor who decided that no, he thought the Nicene Creed was, and then it went back and forth and back and forth. This was mainly in the East because they love to argue about those kind of things. But now we're talking about what happened in the Anglican Reformation, and the same thing happened between the Catholics and the Protestants. And that's what your handout is for today. This does not include all of the kings and queens down through all the years, but, and I think this may be 150 years or so of flip-flopping. And what would happen, you remember Bloody Mary? Everybody's heard of Bloody Mary? Okay, she was Catholic. Okay, when she became queen, the Anglican Church was a Protestant church. And so she declared, okay, now we're a Catholic church. And she took over all the churches and executed a bunch of people. And that's why they called her Bloody Mary, because she killed so many of the Protestant ministers and stuff. Well, then the next one, oh no, we're Protestant. And the same thing happened. Then they killed off a bunch of the Catholics and became Protestant. And back and forth and back and forth. And the solution, I think, is in the last paragraph of that, when they finally decided they'd had enough. And they said, okay, we're going to be Protestant, and from now on, any king of England must be Protestant. And that's why they've been Protestant ever since. And then you've got the Protestant Anglican Church, and there are still then people in there arguing and trying to change things, and well, this is not quite right, let's change this or let's change that. The Pietists were one of the big ones that came in that really started messing with the church. It caused them a whole lot of trouble, and they finally got the Pietists quieted down. And then here comes John Wesley, whose father was a Pietist. And he comes up and he starts wanting to make some changes in the church. Well, the Anglican Church doesn't want anything to do with John Wesley, because they say, you're just another one of those Pietists that's in here trying to stir up trouble. And he would go to these different Anglican churches and preach. And the funniest thing is that John Wesley, if you look through his journals and everything, he writes his diary in the places that he went to preach. And he said, went to preach and such, asked not to come back. And then went to preach at so-and-so, can't go back there either. So he was just in there just irritating the heck out of the Anglican Church. And we'll get more of that when we get directly into John Wesley. But right now we're going to go from, we've got the Anglican Reformation, and here comes the Wesley.
Okay, I think when we're looking at the context of early Methodism, it's sometimes difficult. I don't think we realize how radical some of the things that John Wesley did actually were. And it's radical because of the context, and primarily because of the political context. You think about when you're young and you're in Sunday school and you don't understand why Jesus came into trouble. You think he's just being nice to everybody and he's doing what he's supposed to do, and yet they turn on him. And I think we don't understand things like that when we're young because we don't understand the context. And I think, unfortunately, we've done something similar with Methodism. Wesley and his preachers and the people around him are kind of seen as these benevolent preachers who weren't really challenging the context, but instead were simply trying to convert people. Now, they were, in fact, trying to bring the gospel to many in England who had not heard it. That's true. But they were doing it in the context of a country that had been shaken up by religious conflict for almost 200 years. Think of the English Reformation. The English Reformation, I think, in order to understand Wesley, ironically, right, an 18th century figure, you actually have to go back to the English Reformation, which is the 16th century. And we kind of know the general outlines of that. Henry VIII wanted a divorce, etc., etc. It's a bit more complicated, but we won't get into that. But essentially, what happens in England is you have, once Henry starts his reforms, which weren't very many actually, with each successive monarch, you have a different reigning religious perspective. Some of them went very Protestant. Some of them, like Mary Tudor, went very Catholic. And she wasn't the only one. And so you had this back and forth for over 150 years, and we often forget that. And when you have a people who have been going back and forth in terms of their religion for that long, after a while, really what they want is peace. In the century previous to Wesley's, in the 17th century, we actually see a civil war break out. And it's not entirely about religion, but religion plays a key role. And so you have people on one side, the Puritans primarily, against the monarchists on the other side. One was with Parliament and one was with the king. And so you had almost an Anglican Puritan war at that point. And it led to the Commonwealth period, where the Puritans essentially, for about 20 years, ruled England. They they got rid of the king, in fact they killed him, and they stripped the church of its bishops, its priests, its vestments, its prayer book, all of these things, and only after 20 years did Parliament in fact ask Charles II to come back. Some scholars say that the Puritans literally bored the English to death. You know, you've got all kinds of social things in there the Puritans in fact wanted to force on to the English people as a whole. But in 1660, they asked Charles II to come back, and he reinstated the Church of England with all of its bishops, priests, deacons, prayer books, rituals, etc. Now, it wasn't long, though, until you had a Catholic monarch on the throne. And so then you have the Glorious Revolution of 1688, which finally, after that, Parliament decrees there must be a Protestant on the Church of England. And so what we have here is Wesley comes into a context which is extremely difficult. And in certain ways, he's almost like a bull in a china shop. The people in 18th century England had been through all of this turmoil, and so by the time we get here, they want to have a steady church and a steady monarch. But here the Methodists are in fact doing some of the similar things that the Puritans did in the previous century. The Methodists didn't create field preaching, nor did they create small groups, nor did they, create quite a few of the structures that they used. All of them were politically charged. Yet what was driving Wesley? That's the good question. I think that's something that Methodists need to pay attention to. It was his desire to preach the new birth. And so what he did is he actually created a community, despite the political repercussions, that was centered on the new birth, centered on a transformative relationship with God, and he didn't quite care, to an extent, didn't care what the repercussions might be politically and socially. He created a community that was actually shaped and formed by that very ideal. And I think that's something that Methodists could probably learn from today.
Well, so now we start into true Methodism. That's the end of the videos that I've got for today. What comments do you have about this as we get ready to jump off into the deep end next Tuesday?
Getting interesting.
The main thing I think we all, and this guy alluded to it, is what was Wesley's plan? What was his idea? What drove him to do these things that he did? And the most interesting thing I think I can tell you in the beginning here about John Wesley is that it was never John Wesley's intention to start a new church.
Well, what inspired him then to break apart from Calvinism?
He was upset with the kind of the same things that was going on in the Anglican church, in that the priests were getting a little too big for their britches. They were cold. They were doing dull, incredibly horrible, terrible, stupid things in worship, and nobody was getting anything out of worship. And that's the biggest thing to Wesley, was that nobody was moved by worship anymore. And he felt like it was the obligation of the church to provide worship that moves people.
Yeah.
And so these groups that he was forming, initially, he would not allow them to meet on Sunday mornings. He had them meet during the week. And he divided them up into smaller groups, accountability groups with about 5 or 6 people, and they met quite often during the week. And then accounts of those groups, the bigger groups were classes which met once a week or so, and there was a leader of those classes. But the whole idea was to get you excited about religion, to make it mean something to you, and then you were going to be the ones going into the Anglican worship on Sunday morning and turn it into something. And he and his brother, Charles, fought, because Charles was the first one to give up, say, no, we're not going to be able to change it. We might as well just start a new denomination. And Wesley fought that until the very end. And when Wesley died, he was not a member of the Methodist Church. He was an Anglican priest on the day he died. He absolutely refused, even when
John Wesley?
yeah, even when it was getting away from him, and we'll get into a lot of what was going on in America. The American church had pretty well cast him out because they were going to start a new church whether he wanted to or not, and he just refused to take any part of it, and their term for him was the old man. And so what we've got now in the church in America is the church that essentially cast John Wesley out.
More rebels.
Mm-hmm.
But even today, there is a theological schism between Calvinism and
Mm-hmm.
Methodism. That being that Calvinism says that your soul is determined at birth.
Mm-hmm.
And you are either fated to be blessed by God, or you're out of luck. Whereas John Wesley said, salvation is available to anybody who simply asks for it. I like that better.
Mm-hmm. Well, and the counter to Calvinism is Arminianism. That's what John Wesley believed was, but he was an Arminian. And the magazine, he wrote all kinds of pamphlets and stuff, but the big magazine that he put out on a regular basis was called The Arminian. And he used that magazine to discount Calvinism at every opportunity that he had. The two people that he loved to fight with more than anybody else were the Calvinists and the Catholics.
I'll be darned.
Which is, and I don't remember if we get into this or not, he may get mentioned every so often. There was a Charles Whitfield, who was one of the preachers in this thing, and I think he was, I believe he was an Anglican priest at one time too, but he was Calvinist. And he and John Wesley were almost best friends. And he actually died before Wesley did, but there was a period of time where all of the preaching houses that Wesley owned, which he made them, put all the preaching houses in his name.
Oh.
And he had in his will that they were all going to go to Whitfield if he died.
Oh, yeah.
Even though Whitfield was a Calvinist and they argued constantly. So we come from a heritage of people that love to argue. Doctrinal fussing and fighting is in our genes. That's what we do.
Well, in spite of the differences I just mentioned, I've been, for many years, I was a member of the Presbyterian Church in Portland, and then I came here and I liked the feeling of it better.
Mm-hmm.
But the content of worship is virtually identical.
Mm-hmm.
They don't talk about this fatalistic approach to living in the Presbyterian, at least in that Presbyterian church.
And when I talk to Presbyterians and Lutherans about predestination and Calvinism, they don't know what I'm talking about. They go, what are you talking about? I said, oh yeah, on the day you're born, it's already decided if you're going to go to heaven or hell. And they go, well, that's crazy. And I go, that's your don't tell me that.
Yeah.
Yeah, I used to have quite a few real fun debates with the Lutheran pastor that actually his congregation worshipped in our church in Hermiston. They worshipped it. Lisa, what time did they start? 9:30?
I don't remember.
They started in the sanctuary when I was at Pendleton. And then by the time we got the card made, they were finishing up, and we had coffee hour together.
Oh.
And then we would take over, and the Lutherans would all leave, or some of them would hang around too.
And then you tell them the truth. You troublemakers, you.
Okay, we're done. See y'all next week.
Fantastic.
All right.
Thank you.